Imagine two flights taking off, one in the United States and one in China, both packed with passengers. The Chinese jet is fulfilling a national goal, connecting far-flung cities as a matter of state strategy. The American jet, meanwhile, is laser-focused on one thing: profit. This fundamental difference in mission underlies why US airlines mint money, while Chinese airlines often struggle to break even. In China, the largest airlines, Air China, China Southern, China Eastern, are state-owned carriers woven into the nation's economic plan. The Chinese government treats aviation as public infrastructure and a tool for development and influence. These airlines expand routes to bolster connectivity, from remote western provinces to new international links in Africa and Asia, sometimes at the expense of profitability. Fares on many domestic routes are kept affordable by policy. On routes where multiple state carriers overlap, the government has even imposed price controls to prevent fare wars, resulting in identical ticket prices across airlines. The priority is to move people and support national goals. Profits are secondary. Indeed, even as China became the world's largest domestic air travel market, its big airlines often operate like public utilities rather than profit-driven firms. By contrast, US airlines operate in a free market, shareholder-centric system. Since deregulation in 1978, American carriers have been set loose to compete, consolidate, and pursue profit above all. There is no ministry dictating routes or prices. Instead, there's Wall Street demanding returns. Airlines in the US live and die by quarterly earnings. This has forged a very different corporate philosophy. Capacity is cut if it's unprofitable, routes exist only if they make money, and every passenger is seen as a revenue opportunity. The result is that American carriers have evolved into lean, commercially aggressive entities whose mission is to maximize shareholder value. They are quick to adopt new profit strategies, even if it means angering customers with fees or reducing service, because their North Star is the bottom line. This philosophical divide is apparent in the financial outcomes. In recent years, US airlines have posted towering profits while Chinese airlines have languished with losses. For example, in 2024, Delta Airlines earned a hefty net profit of $3.46 billion, among the highest in the world, and United Airlines made $3.15 billion. In that same year, China's major carriers were deep in the red. China Eastern Airlines lost about $578 million, and China Southern lost around $244 million. It marked the fifth straight year of losses for China's big three state-owned airlines. Even as the rest of global aviation returned to profitability in 2023, China's carriers could not break out of the red. Their pandemic-era losses, which averaged an astonishing $5 billion per airline in 2022, narrowed to a much smaller, but still negative, $286 million each in 2024. In short, American airlines are minting money, while Chinese airlines have been bleeding cash or barely breaking even. What explains this yawning gap? It's not that Chinese airlines lack size or demand. China's aviation market is huge, carrying over 1 billion passengers annually, with a fleet rivaling the US. The difference is how the airlines are run and why they fly. Chinese carriers serve the state's strategic aims, ensuring connectivity, supporting economic growth, and even advancing geopolitical influence, for instance, by launching new routes as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Profitability comes second to these broader goals. US carriers, on the other hand, serve private investors. They have every incentive to extract maximum profit from every plane, route, and customer. A telling illustration is airfare and yield. In China, ticket prices are often kept low to encourage travel and economic activity. The average domestic economy airfare in 2024 was only about 767 yen, approximately $105 one way. That low pricing boosts mobility for consumers, but it squeezes airline margins. Chinese airlines also face competition from ultra-efficient high-speed rail on many city pairs, further pressuring them to keep fares modest. In the US, by contrast, fares on comparable routes can be several times higher, and there's little alternative transport competition. American carriers have also become expert in making passengers pay extra beyond the base fare, a concept we'll explore soon. So, at the highest level, the mission differs. Chinese airlines focus on flying as a public service, while US airlines focus on monetizing every aspect of air travel. One side chases market share and connectivity, the other chases profit margins. In the next act, we'll dive into two of the key secrets that allow US airlines to be so consistently profitable, secrets largely absent in China's aviation playbook. How exactly do US airlines turn airplanes into cash machines? The answer comes down to two core strategies that have supercharged their profits. First, the Fortress Hub strategy, which grants American carriers virtual monopolies over major airports and the pricing power that comes with it. Second, the mastery of ancillary revenues, all those baggage fees, seat fees, and add-ons that pump billions into airline coffers. Together, these two factors form the profit engine behind US airlines. Let's break each of them down. A Fortress Hub is an airline's stronghold, an airport where one carrier holds a dominant share of flights, gates, and passengers, often crowding out any serious competition. In the US, Fortress Hubs are a cornerstone of the big airline's business model. By controlling a hub, an airline can funnel in traffic from dozens of smaller cities, spokes, route them through the hub, and send them onward to final destinations. The key is that at that hub airport, the airline effectively reigns as king. It can set higher fares and face little threat from rivals encroaching on its turf. Take a few examples. American Airlines controls about 88% of the passenger market share at Charlotte Douglas International, CLT, essentially owning the airport. Delta Airlines holds about 78% of the market at its home base in Atlanta, ATL, the world's busiest airport. United Airlines commands roughly 79% at Houston Intercontinental, IAH. These numbers, well above the 70% threshold often used to define a Fortress Hub, mean that if you're flying into or out of one of these airports, odds are you're on that airline. The airline can offer more convenient schedules for connections, capture business travelers, and crucially, control prices on many routes. When one airline controls an entire region's connecting hub, it can charge a premium, sometimes dubbed a Fortress Hub tax, by frustrated flyers, because alternative options are limited. The financial rewards of Fortress Hubs are significant. In 2024, US airlines with Fortress Hubs earned on average about $9.53 in pre-tax profit per passenger, more than double the $4.36 per passenger average in Europe. Why the huge gap? One reason is that in Europe or Asia, major airports usually have two or more airlines competing. Think London or Beijing, where multiple carriers jostle, keeping fares in check. But in the US, many cities are dominated by one legacy carrier. Less competition on connecting routes means airlines can charge higher fares or give fewer discounts, boosting yield per passenger. It's basically a local monopoly situation, sanctioned by the market dynamics. Delta's Atlanta hub, for instance, is so entrenched that it bankrolls the rest of Delta's network, as analysts put it. The profits from that one Fortress Hub subsidize other routes where competition is tougher. Fortress Hubs became possible largely due to industry consolidation. Over the last 20 years, US airlines merged from around 10 major carriers down to the Big Four today: American, Delta, United, and Southwest. Each merger, Delta with Northwest, United with Continental, American with US Airways, etc., allowed the surviving airlines to inherit hubs and strengthen their dominance in key cities. For example, after merging with US Airways, American Airlines amassed an even larger stronghold in Charlotte and Philadelphia. The result is an oligopoly where each big airline has a few Fortress Hubs that are cash cows. At Charlotte and Dallas-Fort Worth, American can fill planes with connecting passengers and face only token competition. At Atlanta and Detroit, Delta does the same. At Houston and Newark, it's United's show. This consolidation walled off what used to be hotly contested markets. Low-cost carriers like JetBlue or Spirit find it hard to make a dent at these hubs because the dominant airline has locked in the gates, corporate contracts, and customer loyalty in the region. To be fair, Fortress Hubs aren't completely competition-free. In some cases, two big airlines split a metro area. For instance, in the Texas Metroplex, American runs a Fortress at Dallas-Fort Worth, while Southwest has a strong focus city at nearby Dallas Love Field. In New York, United rules Newark, while Delta holds a lot of sway at JFK/LaGuardia. But even in these cases, each airline has its turf. Business travelers often stick to the dominant carrier to accrue miles, and because that carrier offers the most flights. This creates high switching costs. A company based in Atlanta, for example, will almost always book Delta because of the convenience of Delta's network at ATL, allowing Delta to charge a bit more without losing business. It's a virtuous cycle for the airline. Dominance leads to customer loyalty and pricing power, which leads to higher profits that can be reinvested in even more dominance, new lounges, more frequencies, etc. Chinese airlines, by contrast, have not achieved or been allowed the same level of fortress hub dominance within China. The big three Chinese carriers are somewhat regionally divided. Air China traditionally strong in Beijing, China Eastern in Shanghai, China Southern in Guangzhou. But they overlap on major routes and now even share cities. Beijing, for instance, has Air China based at one airport and China Southern at the newer Daxing airport. The government has aimed to prevent any one airline from monopolizing a major hub to ensure a balance. On key trunk routes like Beijing-Shanghai, multiple Chinese airlines compete, often with near-identical ticket prices due to state coordination. So while Chinese carriers do have hubs, they don't have free rein to hike fares. Moreover, China's high-speed rail network siphons off a lot of short-haul traffic that would otherwise feed an airline hub. The result: Chinese hubs are busy but not especially profitable. There isn't the concept of gouging a captive market because the government and competition, and even alternate transport modes, keep it in check. Fortress hubs in the US directly boost profitability. They allow airlines to economize on scale, operating hundreds of flights out of a single megahub for efficiency, and to capture premium revenue from connecting itineraries. For example, an airline can charge a customer flying from a small Midwestern town through its hub to a big city more than if that customer had more choices, because often the hub and spoke is the only practical option. The data bears this out. Delta and United, which have some of the strongest hub networks, have consistently higher profit margins than peers. In Q2 2025, Delta's pre-tax profit margin was 11.6%, while American, which has been somewhat less efficient with its hubs, was 5.8%. The fortress hubs give Delta a cushion of pricing power and traffic diversity that American, struggling with higher costs and slightly less dominant positions at some hubs, hasn't fully matched. In essence, the fortress hub strategy lets US airlines operate like regional monopolies, something Chinese airlines, under a more state-planned system, haven't replicated domestically. The next secret goes beyond the route network and dives into how airlines make money once the passenger is on board, or even before boarding, the world of fees and extras that US airlines exploit so well. If you've flown any US airline in recent years, you've felt the sting of ancillary fees. Want to check a bag? That'll be $30 or more. Extra legroom seat? Another $50. Want to board early or choose your seat in advance? Pay up. Buy a sandwich on board. Swipe your card. These a la carte charges, once rare, now ubiquitous, are called ancillary revenues, and they have utterly transformed the economics of American carriers. For the airlines, ancillary fees are a goldmine. They're often high margin. A checked bag costs the airline far less than what they charge for it, and they're additive to the ticket price, allowing airlines to advertise lower base fares, but then earn more from passengers who upgrade their experience. US airlines have embraced this model wholeheartedly. In 2023, the top 10 airlines in the world by total ancillary revenue included 5 US carriers, led by United, Delta, and American. United Airlines alone raked in over $9.5 billion in ancillary revenue in 2023. Things like baggage fees, seat fees, extra services, an approximately 21% increase from the year before. Delta was close behind with about $9.4 billion, and American with $8.4 billion. Even Southwest, famous for its bags fly free policy, still generated nearly $6.8 billion in ancillary revenue, through other means like early boarding fees, etc. For perspective, these figures are huge. In some cases, ancillary sales alone for a US airline can exceed the total passenger revenue of a medium-sized foreign airline. The ability of US airlines to upsell and cross-sell to customers has become a critical profit lever. Let's consider baggage fees, one of the largest components of ancillary revenue. Before 2008, it was standard in the US that even economy passengers got at least one checked bag free. That changed when skyrocketing fuel prices and a weak economy pressured airlines to find new revenue. American Airlines introduced the first checked bag fee in 2008, and most competitors quickly followed. The effect was dramatic. By 2019, US airlines were collectively earning roughly $5 billion a year from baggage fees alone, a pure add-on to the bottom line. Similarly, charges for ticket changes and cancellations, at least before US carriers largely dropped change fees in 2020 to win back travelers, brought in billions more. Every pillow, every snack, every inch of legroom. If it can be unbundled from the base fare and sold separately, it will be in the US model. These ancillary charges significantly boost profit margins because they often have low associated costs. The ancillary revenue per passenger for US airlines is among the highest in the world. United, for instance, earned about $57.99 per passenger in ancillary revenue in 2023 on average. That's effectively an extra approximately $58 on top of every ticket, on average, coming from add-ons. Traditional international airlines usually see far less ancillary per passenger, often under $20, and Chinese full-service airlines historically earned only a modest amount per passenger from extras, since a lot was included in the fare. None of China's big three carriers appear in the global top 10 for ancillary revenue per passenger. That leaderboard is dominated by American carriers and a few fee-happy low-cost airlines elsewhere. The only China-based name that shows up is Hong Kong's HK Express, a low-cost carrier, which averaged about $52 per passenger in ancillaries. But that airline is a tiny niche player compared to mainland giants. Chinese airlines have only gingerly started to adopt the ancillary revenue playbook. Culturally and by regulation, they were slower to unbundle services. A domestic Chinese airline ticket traditionally included a free checked bag, usually a weight allowance like 20 kilograms, and a meal on board. Seat selection was often free or not explicitly charged. Only in recent years have Chinese carriers, faced with low yields, begun to experiment with charges. For example, selling seat upgrades, charging for extra bags beyond a free allowance, or selling access to lounges. There are private low-cost carriers in China, like Spring Airlines, that from the outset followed a Ryanair-style model of charging for everything. Spring Airlines' success, it managed to stay profitable and was one of the few Chinese airlines with a positive 8% margin in 2023, is partly due to embracing ancillary sales and low costs. But the state-owned Big Three have not historically pushed ancillary sales to anywhere near US levels. Part of the reason is competitive and regulatory. The government didn't want public backlash against nickel and diming, especially when the air travel market was still developing. Also, Chinese consumers have alternatives, like trains, if flying becomes too pricey with add-ons, so airlines kept a lot of services bundled to maintain a good customer experience and win market share. The net effect? Chinese airlines left money on the table that US airlines eagerly scooped up. Let's put numbers to it. Ancillary revenue as a share of total revenue is much higher for US carriers. In 2022, it was estimated that worldwide about 15% of airline revenue came from ancillaries, but for leading US airlines, this percentage can be closer to 20% or more. For example, in 2024, roughly 19% of United Airlines' revenue came from sources other than passenger tickets, including baggage fees, loyalty program revenue, etc. For Southwest, ancillaries, including its co-branded credit card, made up over 21% of revenue. Meanwhile, for a Chinese airline like Air China, ancillary revenues, excluding cargo, have historically been only a single-digit percentage of revenue, much of that being cargo or excess baggage fees charged by weight. The difference is stark. US carriers have turned the act of flying into a flurry of retail transactions, whereas Chinese carriers are still mostly just selling transportation. It's worth noting that passengers often grumble about these fees, but from a business standpoint, they have been a game changer for US airlines. By charging separately for perks and baggage, airlines effectively price discriminate. Leisure travelers who are price-sensitive can opt out and take the cheapest basic economy seat with no extras, while those who value convenience or comfort will pay more. The result is more total revenue extracted across a diverse customer base. Ancillaries also gave US airlines a buffer during downturns. When base fares dropped or demand slumped, fees for things like frequent flyer seat upgrades or baggage could still bring in cash from those who continued to fly. Chinese airlines, prioritizing volume and national service, were slower to wield this tool. However, as China's aviation market matures and competition, including from low-cost upstarts, grows, we have started to see Chinese carriers introduce tiered fares, e.g., no-frills tickets versus flexible tickets, and more aggressive selling of add-ons. Still, they are playing catch-up to the US, where ancillary revenue generation has been refined into an art form. Having covered how US airlines leverage where you fly, fortress hubs, and how you fly, ancillary fees, to pump up profits, there's one more secret to discuss, one that's less visible to passengers, but might be the most lucrative of all. This final secret is something most travelers think of as a perk, not a business. But for US airlines, frequent flyer programs, their loyalty schemes like American's A-Advantage, Delta's Sky Miles, United's Mileage Plus, have evolved into massive cash cows, so lucrative that they often earn more profit than the airline's core flying operation. It might be hard to believe. How can giving away free flights to loyal customers be a moneymaker? The answer lies in how airlines sell miles and leverage loyalty programs as financial instruments. In fact, one industry insider quipped that many airlines today are basically credit card companies with wings, and that's not far from the truth. Here's how it works. Airlines sell billions of frequent flyer miles to credit card companies and other partners. Every time you swipe an airline co-branded credit card, like a Delta Sky Miles Amex or a United Mileage Plus Visa, the bank pays the airline for those miles you earn. The bank, in turn, is happy to buy those miles because miles entice you to use the card more. The airline essentially creates a currency, miles, and sells it to banks, who use it to reward customers. This has turned loyalty programs into a separate business line with huge, steady revenues. Airlines also sell miles to hotels, car rental agencies, online shopping portals, any partner that wants to offer miles as an incentive. And because the cost for an airline to provide a mile, which eventually might be redeemed for a seat that would otherwise go empty or be paid by the partner, is far less than the cash they get for selling it, the profit margins are sky high. To see the scale of these programs, Delta's Sky Miles loyalty program was recently valued at roughly $28 billion, at times worth more than Delta Airlines' own market capitalization. American's A-Advantage program is valued around $24 billion, and United's Mileage Plus around $22 billion. These valuations aren't just conjecture, they've been borne out in the real world. In 2020, when the pandemic brought air travel to a standstill, US airlines mortgaged their loyalty programs to stay afloat. United raised an emergency $6.8 billion loan using Mileage Plus as collateral. Delta borrowed $9 billion against Sky Miles, and American secured a whopping $10 billion backed by A-Advantage. Investors were willing to lend vast sums because they saw the loyalty programs as highly valuable, reliable assets, more reliable, in fact, than airplanes that were grounded at the time. That episode made clear that loyalty programs are financial powerhouses, not side hustles. As one report noted, for many airlines, loyalty proved more bankable than ticket sales themselves during the crisis. The revenue flowing from these programs is enormous. In 2023, the four largest US airlines' loyalty programs collectively generated about $32.2 billion in revenue. Delta's Sky Miles brought in nearly $6.6 billion, roughly $34.50 per passenger on average. American's A-Advantage, over $6.5 billion, $30.93 per passenger. United's Mileage Plus, $5.5 billion, and Southwest's Rapid Rewards, $5.7 billion. Southwest actually had the highest loyalty revenue per passenger at $41.88. These figures include the miles sold to partners, which airlines typically record as marketing revenue, and certain redemption-related revenues. The profit margin on this revenue is extremely high. Estimates range from 39% to over 50% margin for frequent flyer revenue, far above the single-digit margins of the airline business. Why? Because once a mile is sold to a bank, the airline incurs very little incremental cost until the passenger actually redeems it for a flight, and even then, many redemptions occupy seats that would otherwise fly empty or are paid by the bank's purchase. A large portion of miles are never redeemed at all, known as breakage, which turns into pure profit. It's not an exaggeration to say that loyalty programs prop up the entire US airline industry's profitability. A recent analysis showed that if you remove loyalty program revenues, no major US airline would have been profitable in 2024. For example, Delta had a 10.5% operating margin in 2024, but without its loyalty revenue, that would have swung to a minus 2.5% margin. United's 8.9% margin would become negative 1.9%, and American's 4.8% margin would plummet to negative 8.3% without loyalty income. Even Southwest, which had a slim 1.2% margin, would have been deeply negative, negative 19.9%, without Rapid Rewards contributions. In other words, the entire profit of these airlines is essentially coming from the loyalty programs. The flying operation alone is often a break-even or loss leader. One analyst humorously compared it to Costco's hot dog sales. Airlines sell the seat, like a cheap hot dog, at low margin to get people in the door, so they can then make money on the loyalty program. Costco makes its real money on memberships, not the $1.50 hot dog. It's a startling realization that flipping frequent flyer miles to banks has become more lucrative than hauling people through the sky. Why don't Chinese airlines just do the same? They do have frequent flyer programs, Air China's Phoenix Miles, China Eastern's Eastern Miles, etc. And there are Chinese co-branded credit cards, often tied with Bank of China, ICBC, etc. However, China's credit card market and consumer behavior are different. Credit card usage, while growing, hasn't historically been as dominant in China. Many consumers leapfrog to mobile payments via Alipay/WeChat Pay. So the culture of earning miles via credit card spend is less ingrained than in the US. Additionally, Chinese banks may not pay as richly for miles, and the airlines haven't cultivated their programs as aggressively as US carriers have. The loyalty programs exist more to encourage repeat flying, a traditional approach, rather than to serve as standalone profit centers. That's slowly changing. For instance, China Southern's Sky Pearl Club and others have been expanding partnerships and co-brand cards. But the scale is minuscule compared to the US giants. We don't see Chinese airlines reporting multi-billion-dollar marketing revenue from selling points to banks. It remains a supplemental business rather than the core. Essentially, Chinese carriers are about 30 years behind the US in the loyalty game, where US airlines turned frequent flyer programs into sophisticated financial operations. Chinese airlines still treat them closer to a classic loyalty scheme: buy X tickets, get one free, with some co-brand perks on the side. The dominance of loyalty economics in the US is even steering strategic decisions. Delta's CEO Ed Bastian recently revealed that Delta is choosing to grow in certain cities largely to acquire more credit card customers. He cited Delta's expansion in Austin and Raleigh-Durham, not traditional Delta strongholds, by saying, "These are places we acquire a lot of cards." In other words, Delta is adding flights not just based on whether the route itself is profitable, but whether having a presence in that city will drive more people to sign up for the Delta American Express card and spend on it. Airline network planning is being influenced by loyalty program math. A route that might be marginal on ticket revenue can be justified if it brings in a slew of high-spending credit card members in that region. United's CEO Scott Kirby made a similar point, that being the number one airline in a city leads to outsized credit card sign-ups and spend, which is why United has focused on dominating key hubs and even added exotic new destinations as redemption sweeteners, like new flights to far-flung places in Greenland or secondary cities in Europe. Southwest, too, ventured to Hawaii in part to give its loyal customers an aspirational vacation destination, which in turn makes the Southwest Visa card more attractive. You earn points to redeem for that Hawaii trip. Meanwhile, American Airlines has faced some headwinds precisely because it scaled back in certain major cities like New York and Los Angeles. It consequently saw its card spend volume drop relative to Delta and United. These examples underline that loyalty revenue isn't just padding profits, it's driving core business strategy. Airlines are behaving like financial services companies, optimizing where to invest capacity to maximize the yield of their loyalty currency. It is a stunning contrast. Chinese airlines focus on the physical act of flying people, whereas US airlines focus on monetizing those people's loyalty and wallets beyond the flight itself. A Chinese carrier might measure success in passenger numbers carried or new routes opened. A US carrier measures success in operating margin, ancillary revenue per passenger, and the growth of its co-branded credit card spend. Delta recently noted that spending on its Amex cards was approaching 1% of total US GDP, a jaw-dropping figure that underscores the scale of this business. So, hidden behind the scenes, the loyalty programs form an empire of miles that fuels US airline profits. Selling miles is often more profitable than selling seats. This is the epitome of the US airline as a profit machine. It also explains why US airlines bounced back quickly after downturns. Their fortunes are tied not only to volatile oil prices and ticket sales, but also to the relatively stable revenue of banking partnerships and credit card spend, which tend to be resilient. In China, airlines live and die by more traditional metrics: ticket revenues, government support, and cost management of their flying business.